face-to-face conversation where we can thrash out these issues and try and find out a bit more about what the actual position of the Home Office is. The report that I've written came out about a week and a half ago. It's called Spoon Talent to Prevent Violent Extremism. It's the result of a 6-month research project which involved me doing around 32 interviews with managers of local Prevent boards, which are the bodies that manage Prevent programs locally, individuals who are workers or managers in Prevent funded projects, I did a number of freedom of information requests, and we had a roundtable discussion in Bradford in July to explore some of the issues that came out of the interviews. Now, the report makes a number of claims about the way that the Prevent programme impacts on local communities. But tonight I'm just going to speak about one issue, which is the question of surveillance, which is the subject for tonight. For those interested in the bigger picture, I would encourage you to download the report for free from the Institute of Race Relations website, which is www.irr.org.uk. I think it's worth beginning by establishing what I think is some common ground. There is a real and ongoing threat of terrorism in Britain. I don't want to underestimate the seriousness of that threat or the difficulties involved in trying to intercept potential acts of violence. But those difficulties notwithstanding, I think it remains vital to apply human rights standards to counter-terrorism programmes. Not least because in the long term, that's the essential precondition for ensuring community support. And I don't think that we should shy away from taking a critical stand where necessary for fear of giving succour to extremists. What we do need to do, however, is proceed in an evidence-based way. So, you know, a lot of the time you hear conspiracy theories circulating, you hear a lot of speculation about Prevent. I'm not interested in that. I want to be absolutely precise in stating what the allegation is in relation to surveillance and Prevent. And the first thing to say is, I believe it is entirely appropriate that the police and intelligence services have placed a number of Muslim individuals under surveillance in the UK. It's also right that channels should be made available for professionals such as youth workers and teachers to provide information to the police if there are reasons to believe that an individual is involved in any kind of criminality. But what's at issue with Prevent is whether professionals providing non-policing local services, such as teachers and youth workers, whether they should be expected to routinely provide information to the counter-terrorist police, not just on individuals who might be about to commit a criminal offence, but also on the political and religious opinions of young Muslims. And my research suggests that a major part of the Prevent programme is actually to foster precisely those kinds of flows of information, so that youth workers and teachers inform the police about individuals whose opinions are considered extreme. And individuals identified in this way are then passed on to something called the Channel Programme, which seeks to re-educate them out of their extremist opinions. Now, the point about Prevent is that it is defined as a community programme that's aimed at empowering communities to challenge extremism, which is something that needs to be done. And it's not meant to have a hidden agenda that is about gathering intelligence. Gathering intelligence is another part of a counter-terrorism strategy, what the government calls pursue. And it's important that Prevent and pursue do not become confused. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to present the evidence that such a confusion is actually taking place in practice, and that the surveillance component to Prevent does exist. Before I explain why such a system of surveillance is counterproductive to the basic aims of Prevent. Now, in terms of the evidence, what we have is a kind of jigsaw puzzle, and each of the pieces on its own could have a different interpretation, but when you put the pieces together, I think the evidence is overwhelming. The first piece of the jigsaw is that a number of the people who I spoke to who run Prevent programmes locally told me about the expectations on them as managers of youth work projects or community projects, expectations on them to act as sources of intelligence. So the manager of a youth work project in London told me that he was being asked to provide systematic information about the religious and political opinions of young Muslims involved in his project, as well as details of which mosque they attend, what street corners they hang out on, what their different ethnic backgrounds are. Similarly, the manager of a youth work project who I spoke to in a northern city told me that he had regular requests from the police to find out about the religious and political opinions of all the young Muslims he works with, even suggesting to him what conversations he should have with those young people in order to elicit their views on particular subjects. In another part of the north, I saw a funding application to the Home Office, which I believe has been accepted, and which was supported by the local police, for a youth centre aimed at Muslims. The centre was to provide sports, keep fit, recreational facilities and careers advice, as well as religious guidance that aimed at providing a counter-extremism narrative. Great. But the bid also recommended the inclusion of free IT facilities, as it was, I quote, good for monitoring which websites people were visiting, and intelligence gathering was stated as one of the rationales for the centre. The second piece in the jigsaw is the information sharing agreements that Prevent funded projects are being asked to sign. Now, these basically provide the legal basis for information to flow from professionals such as youth workers to other local agencies, including the police. And what these documents basically do, I've seen two for two different local authority areas. What they basically do is define how those flows of information are compatible with Human Rights Act, which protects privacy, and Data Protection Act. And what these documents basically say is, well, compliance with those acts is effectively automatic because of the threat of national security. The third piece of the jigsaw is the fact that a briefing on Prevent prepared for the Association of Chief Police Officers in March 2008 states that one outcome of the police's involvement in Prevent is, I quote, the improved ability of the police to develop intelligence in key areas of highest risk through the greater community engagement which Prevent enables. The fourth piece of the jigsaw is the fact that in many places, in many police forces in England at the moment, new teams of officers have been recruited to counter-terrorism units in police forces, whose role is defined in the annual report and the documentation on those posts. Their role is defined as collecting information through the community engagement that Prevent facilitates. Fifth piece of the jigsaw is the fact that in at least one area, the Prevent programme is directly managed by the counter-terrorism unit of the local police force. Birmingham City Council's Equalities Department has a counter-terrorism unit officer seconded to it to manage the Prevent programme there. Sixth piece of the jigsaw is the advice given to schools in the Prevent Toolkit published by the Department for Children, Schools and Families, I think last year, which requests that staff monitor pupils for what it calls the warning signs of extremism and offers guidance on detecting trigger points in children. And it recommends that schools then pass on and share that information with the police. And the Department for Children, Schools and Families also endorses advice from the Quilliam Foundation think tank on how to spot extremists. And that advice says that the indicators of extremism include expressions of political ideology such as support for the Islamic political system, a focus on scripture as an exclusive moral source, what it calls a conspiratorial mindset, what it describes as seeing the West as a source of evil in the world, and what it calls literalism in the reading of Muslim texts. Incredibly vague, I think you'll agree, signs that someone might be an extremist. The Quilliam Foundation is also backing up this written advice with what it calls a radicalisation awareness programme, which is training teachers and other local authority workers on how to supposedly spot the signs of extremism. I think the danger here is that radical religious and political opinions become mistaken for terrorist indoctrination. The Quilliam Foundation last week called me a pro-Islamist. I don't think that says much about their ability to recognise extremists. I've been told of one case in a sixth form college where a classroom discussion about political issues of the day led to a number of Muslim individuals being identified by the school as having extremist opinions, and their details were then passed to the local Prevent board, which includes the police. And it seems that what triggered this was their expressing anger about what was happening in Gaza in January. We don't know how many young Muslims have been identified in this way as having extremist